Hey, what's up? So today I'm going to be reading chapter 2 of my novel about AI, The Mandate of Athena. This chapter is all about VR, the future of education, and how AI and diffusion models can lead to just a way better way of teaching ourselves how to learn. So yeah, the title is Virtual Velociraptor, Homework Helper of the Future, Moonbound Math, Alex and the Lunar Lessons, From Paddocks to Planets, Alex's Virtual Voyage with Scaly. The large orange velociraptor reared up on his hind legs and laughed at Alex. It was enormous, towering over 7 feet tall and covered in shiny sunset orange scales that glinted in the noonday sun. It was helping him with his homework. Alex was standing in the middle of what felt like a real-life farm, complete with a red barn, acres of fruit trees, and vineyards stretching all the way to the horizon, and paddocks of various animals making very realistic animal noises. Alex was currently engaged in moving different animals from one paddock to another in order to achieve the desired ratio of animal to farmland, but was having too much fun quizzing his teacher, Scaly, about unrelated topics that his sheep were beginning to become unruly. Scaly laughed again and answered his unrelated question about the solar system while pointing out that one of his sheep had escaped from the current paddock and had reduced his ratio away from the value he was trying to hit. Of course, he had immediately expended the credits he had earned for completing past assignments to change his teacher's avatar to that of an orange velociraptor and taken to calling him Scaly, because why not? This was a virtual environment and he could do almost anything he wanted in it. He could walk over to the distant vineyards and inspect each individual tree, counting the various oranges or apples growing on it. He could put his hands out and cause the sheep to react realistically. He found it funny that he was herding sheep for a dinosaur called Scaly, and wondered if he could get him to try and eat a sheep. Maybe, but he'd probably lose XP and get reprimanded at school. Even though he was only in year 6, the teachers expected you to take the virtual teaching seriously and not slack off too much. He knew the whole game was generated with something called diffusion that he didn't understand, but it was good enough to spend hours a day in, and it was fun. That's all he cared about. He jumped to the side, blocking the errant sheep's path, and herded it back into the correct paddock, completing his 32 sheep to 128 square meter desired ratio. A large mission completed banner briefly flickered in glowing neon letters above the paddock with a small XP gain before disappearing just as fast. It was the only indication that the scene was not entirely real, so believable was the virtual environment around him. The only sign apart from the talking orange velociraptor. Scaly had given him the 1:4 ratio of sheep to grass and the virtual materials to build a paddock. Alex had then set to work rotating and positioning the paddock materials in the correct orientation so that it made a square shape the size of 16 by 8 meters, which made 128 square meters. He had chosen that size paddock because the pieces of material to build the paddock were only in increments of 4, and he remembered the numbers related to 128 from a computer lesson because it was a multiple of 2. That had been an advanced lesson he probably shouldn't have demanded to take. He didn't know what powers were, but he understood his 2 times tables, and Scaly explained that if you multiplied by 2 enough, you eventually got to 128, which was important in computers because of the 1s and 0s that made him work, only 2 different numbers. From then, he just had to divide the 128 square meters of grass by 4, and he got to his answer of needing to herd 32 sheep into the paddock. It had taken him a while to work out the 16 multiplied by 8, but Scaly had helped him a little when he got stuck and distracted by one of the sheep's dirty wool. "Well done, Alex," Scaly said in a reptilian voice that, although matched his scary appearance, was clear and friendly. "You figured out that 32 sheep to 128 square meters of grass makes a 1:4 ratio. Well done, that was a tough one." "Yes, thanks. Now, tell me something else about the moon like you were saying earlier. Is it really true that I can jump that high if I go there?" He had been quizzing Scaly for information about the moon in between herding sheep and trying to figure out if the computer would let Scaly eat one without reporting it to his teachers. "Ha! I see you still want to know more about the moon. How about this? I'll make you a deal. Finish one more paddock ratio problem, the largest paddock yet, and then we'll switch things up and go to the virtual moon, and I'll tell you all about the 2027 SpaceX mission there, and we'll do some geography work there. What do you say about that?" Alex thought it was weird that Scaly still referred to everything in the game as virtual. He knew it wasn't real and that this was just a really advanced computer game, but he wasn't about to pass up the opportunity to learn more about the moon. "Okay, sounds great." "Excellent. Okay, last one. This one is really hard, so don't worry if you need to ask for help." Scaly waved a talon and the ratio 18:3 appeared over his head. "What I want you to do is pour water into that tank over there by the chicken coop so that there is 3 liters of water for each 18 chickens." Alex walked over to the chickens, who clucked and pecked the ground as he came closer, and Scaly slithered over to sit on the edge of the sheep paddock and watched Alex intently. Alex looked at the chickens and tried to think hard. There were less than 18 chickens, and he had to give 3 liters of water for each chicken. So 3 times 18 is, he reached for the virtual pen and paper that he could use if he couldn't do a sum in his head. So that's 3, 6, 9. Look at the ratio again, Scaly interrupted. 18 to 3 ratio. Remember what a ratio is, the relationship between 2 numbers. Right, Alex said hesitantly. So that means there needs to be 3 liters of water for 18 chickens. Yes, Scaly said encouragingly. Oh, for 18 chickens there needs to be 3 liters of water, and so I need to simplify the ratio and then multiply it by the number of chickens in the coop. Scaly barked his signature velociraptor laugh. Yes, exactly. Alex then counted up in 3s on his fingers, not needing the pen and paper, and stopped when he got to 18. Right, so 18 divided by 3 is 6, and then there are, he quickly counted the chickens, 12 chickens, which means I need to multiply 6 by 12 chickens, which is, he did turn to his virtual pen and paper then and scribbled the numbers down in order to multiply 6 by 10, and then 6 by 2 was easy, so then he added them and got 72. He went to the tap and turned it on so that water poured in quickly and counted the liters off as the level in the tank rised. He realized it hadn't been a ratio problem at all, but rather just a multiplication problem, but the challenges in the game were always like this, seemingly complex on the surface, but simple to solve if you could find the right way of thinking about things. They were also always teaching lots of things at once. The farm games had been maths focused, but Scaly had also been telling him about real life farms and something called sustainability that he hadn't quite understood, but Scaly had said it was about using land and water and food responsibly, so there would be enough for future farms and people to use. He had never actually been to a real-world farm, but he had seen vineyards before from the train window while on a trip to the beach, so he enjoyed playing the farm games and seeing all the different animals. He had seen them in real life at the zoo, but he liked them better in the game, less smelly. He finished turning off the tap with a flick of his hand. The interactions were pretty real, but he wished he could have a pair of haptic gloves that let you touch and feel sensations in the game. But his mom had said they were too expensive, and maybe he could get some for his birthday if he did well at school. He knew she didn't like him playing the game so much, but he loved his virtual lessons and loved doing them. They were actually fun compared to some of the normal lessons and boring digital tests he had at school. His mom was always talking about something called dopamine and the game being too addicting, but he didn't really understand or care what she was talking about. They had started using more and more virtual lessons at the school in the last 2 years, and his grades had gotten so much better since he had started playing them that she had to let him play. He had also been begging her to let him play normal games, not ones that you had to learn things in, but she had mostly refused, saying they were too violent and when he was older he could play them. He had played some VR racing games with his friends though at one of their houses and had loved it so much. Scaly slithered over and looked at the level in the tank. Well done, that's exactly right, Alex. He gave Alex a 2 talons thumbs up, and Alex saw his XP go up marginally. An 18 to 3 ratio is the same as 6 to 1, and so with 12 chickens means they need 72 liters of water altogether. In the real world, it wouldn't be nearly that much. Chickens only need a liter or 2 a day, but for the sake of this game, you worked it out perfectly. Scaly clapped, his talons making a scratching sound as it came together, and the farm started disappearing, the colours and shapes all melting into darkness as the loading screen took over. Alex took the opportunity to take off his headset and rub his eyes a little. He was sitting in the corner of his mom's restaurant and could see her talking to a boy a lot older than him who was ordering some food. Alex thought the boy's name was Xavier or something like that. He got food there often, but Alex had only talked to him once or twice. Alex stretched a little and flexed his fingers. He had been moving them constantly in order to move himself around the virtual environment and select objects. He then slipped the headset back over his eyes and took stock of his surroundings. He was, for all intents and purposes, standing on the surface of the moon. Several meters in front of him, you could see a lunar rover parked on a dusty white surface, and what he recognized as a SpaceX Starship towered over the entire scene. He had to crane his neck back to see the top of it, and he could see some virtual humans unloading cargo and lowering it slowly to the ground on a crane attached to the side of the Starship. Scaly slithered into his field of view from the side, wearing a spacesuit perfectly tailored to his reptilian body, with a large angular helmet covering his head and jaws, but that was completely transparent. When he spoke to Alex, it sounded as if he was talking through an old cell phone, and he grinned at Alex. "Welcome to the moon, Alex!" He gestured expansively at the lunar wasteland around them. "What do you think?" "This is amazing," Alex exclaimed as he swiveled his head around and took in the landscape. "I've done orbital sims around Earth before, but nothing as realistic and as cool as this. Wow." Wow indeed. I think most people have similar feelings of awe and coolness when they first experience gazing out at the foreign world. What does awe mean? Is it like awesome? Kind of. It means if you are amazed or experience wonder, we say you are awed or awestruck. "I am so totally awed," Alex shouted, and he heard his mom tutting to him from back in the real world by the front counter. "Sorry, Mom." He lifted his hand in apology to her, and he accidentally opened a menu in the game. He swiped it aside, and he and Scaly began to walk around the starship, or rather bound, since the gravity in this simulation was so much lower. Alex had flown around in other simulations before, but it had made him feel slightly sick. This was much better. In 2027, Scaly began as he wrapped his talons against the metal side of the starship. The first crewed starship landed on the moon after 55 years since humans were last on the moon in 1972 on Apollo 17. Of course, we had landed lots of robots and even entire starships before 2027, but this was the first time humans went back. Why did we not go for 55 years? Alex wondered aloud. It was expensive, and human politics and other priorities got in the way, Scaly said. Some people thought we should rather focus on problems on Earth. Luckily, others said we could focus on problems on Earth and elsewhere in the solar system at the same time, and worked very hard to make things like the Starship missions happen. Like Elon Musk? Like Elon Musk. He was and still is the CEO of SpaceX. What's a CEO? The leader of a business. That's so dumb that we didn't go for so long when we could have. Yes, it was, Scaly agreed, and Alex was surprised. When Alex expressed disgust or called something dumb, Scaly usually ignored him or explained the complicated real-world politics and reasons behind something. It was unusual for him to express an opinion like that. His attention was brought back to the lunar landscape and the huge silver truck moving past him in the direction of a distant domed building. "Whoa, that truck is huge," he said, as it trundled to a stop and scooped up some of the dirt. "What's it doing?" Scaly threw out his arms and a schematic layer superimposed itself over the landscape and highlighted the truck and the distant building. "What it's doing," he explained, "is collecting the lunar rock and dirt, or what's called regolith, so that it can be used in that building over there for construction, metal and computer chip manufacturing, as well as to extract certain minerals for potential nuclear fusion fuel." "What's nuclear fusion?" "A way of creating electricity by smashing the atoms of certain materials together." "Is that what makes nuclear explosions?" Alex asked, peering over suspiciously at the truck. "No, that's nuclear fission, where you split the atoms of certain materials and lots of energy is released in a large explosion." "Oh, okay," Alex said, and he walked over to the truck and made his virtual self rise off the ground and onto the top of the truck so he could see better. The building in the distance was surrounded by smaller robots and trucks, all darting in and out of the building and moving large amounts of rock and silvery dust. Scaly raised himself up onto Alex's level and pointed. When the first few starships landed on the moon in 2027, they brought with them a large amount of robots that they immediately put to work clearing the surface, making landing pads for future starships, constructing habitats for humans, and generally doing a lot of hard work so that when humans got here a few months later, things would be much easier and they could immediately start doing science and traveling around the South Pole. "The South Pole?" Alex inquired. "Is it freezing then, like the South Pole on Earth?" Scaly conjured up 3 several-meter-wide spheres that floated in front of the desolate landscape, and they quickly resolved themselves into a representation of the solar system. The sun pulsated brightly in the middle, and then the Earth and moon around it sat further afield. "On Earth, the South Pole is so cold because it is further away from the sun than the equator, and leans away from the sun for half the year," Scaly explained, and the floating Earth moved around the sun and showed how the South Pole pointed slightly away from the sun. "And this is what we call winter." "Okay," Alex said. He had seen a similar visualization before. The Earth then moved around the sun to the opposite side of its orbit. Then, during summer, the South Pole is leaning slightly towards the sun, and so it is much warmer, although it's still colder than the rest of the southern hemisphere because it is further away from the sun. As Scaly explained, helpful visualizations, lines, and measurements drew themselves between the sun and the Earth. This is all because the Earth is kind of tilted at 23.4 degrees. A helpful line drew itself between the North and South Pole, and Alex thought he finally understood. Scaly seemed to sense this and asked, "So what would happen if the Earth wasn't tilted?" "It would mean, that there wouldn't be seasons?" Scaly pointed at Earth, and the distance between the sun and both the South Pole and equator were shown again in red. "Yes, Mostly there would not be seasons, because the distance from the sun to any point on Earth would mostly stay the same. There's some other contributing factors that I won't go into, but different places on the Earth would be different temperatures, but those temperatures would be almost constant throughout the year. It's actually possible that life on Earth might not have been able to develop without seasons, as the energy it injects into the environment and world would be missing, and we might not have storms, hurricanes, and the world might not have been able to develop life like it did. Okay, I think I understand, Alex said. So the tilt of the Earth is important and good. The tilt of the Earth is important and good, Scaly agreed. But now, he zoomed in on the moon hanging next to the Earth. What do you notice about the moon's behavior compared to the Earth's? Alex watched as a visualization ran through a year, and in 2 years, as the various heavenly bodies spun and rotated. The moon isn't spinning, Alex said, and pointed at the stationary sphere. It's moving around the Earth, but it isn't spinning. Excellent, Alex. Well done for noticing. But you're not quite right, Scaly explained. You're right that the moon looks like it's not spinning, but it is actually spinning much slower than the Earth. The moon does one whole spin every 29.5 days, and it also takes the moon 29.5 days to go completely around the Earth, or to complete one rotation. The spheres helpfully rotated and revolved to illustrate his point. And so, because the moon's rotation and revolution are the same side of the moon always faces the Earth, which is what we call tidal locking, because the moon is locked to the Earth. Alex must have looked confused because Scaly smiled a toothy grin at him and gestured at the orbital system. Play with it, don't worry, you'll understand it eventually. Most people never do, so you are already ahead in that regard. Zoom in and out on the planets and make time advance and go backwards, and you'll get a grasp of how it all works together. Here, I'll also add in the rest of the solar system objects too. He clicked his fingers and a bunch more planets, asteroids and moons all appeared, all helpfully labelled. Alex fiddled with the solar system model for a while and noted how when he moved the moon around, the actual lunar landscape he was surrounded by changed colour and alternated between light and dark, casting deep shadows on the truck below him and starship behind him. He began to grasp the concepts, and he was soon spinning the planets around madly and making Neptune and Uranus do one slow revolution while the inner planets and asteroids whizzed around in fast circles. Scaly sidled over from where he had been tightening his helmet straps and pointed at the landscape around him. And so, he said, after all that, do you know where we are on the moon? Alex jerked his head around and looked at the shadows stretching along the ground, cutting sharp furrows into the regolith as well as the light that reflected off the truck, distant robots and starship. Scaly sped up the passing of time, and Alex watched as the shadows changed and the sun rose and never fell. We are at one of the poles, Alex said as it clicked into place in his head, because the sun is never setting, even after multiple days. Scaly roared and smiled at Alex. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Well done. You are learning quicker and quicker these days, eh? He said jubilantly. Alex thought the praise was a bit over the top, but appreciated it nevertheless. Yes, we are at one of the poles, and that's why there is always some sun hitting the surface here. Do you know which pole it is? Nope, no clue, Alex admitted freely. I would be surprised if you did know. The moon is only tilted 1.5 degrees, so it could be either, but the first few starships landed near the South Pole in Shackleton Crater, near the peaks of Eternal Light, the name we gave those mountain peaks over there. Scaly pointed at the ridge of the crater off to the right, about 2 kilometers away. They are called that because they are constantly exposed to sunlight and never ever experience darkness or nighttime, so they are the perfect place for solar panels. Why did humans decide to come down to the South Pole? Alex asked. Because there was lots of water ice potentially in the permanent shadow of these craters here, and humans can use that ice for making rocket fuel, oxygen, and water, Scaly explained as he pointed at a heavy-set rover slowly cresting the rim of one of the smaller craters. It was laden with jagged blocks and rocks of what looked to Alex like extremely dirty ice balls. That's ice? But it's so dirty, Alex stated. Yes. It is mixed in with lots of regolith and rock and has to be sorted and carefully processed before we can use it to make all those useful things. That's what the large structure behind the storage facility is. Alex could just see the shadowy structure Scaly was pointing at with a single talon and nodded. Alright, makes sense. When the first few starships landed autonomously in 2027, Alex! Alex jumped up as his mom called his name, and he peeked out from underneath his headset to see her gathering up her things. I've been trying to get your attention for 2 minutes now. We can head home in a few minutes. Finish up so we can beat the evening rush. All right, Mum. He slipped the headset back on and Scaly blinked at him. Need to head off soon? He inquired. Yeah, my mum and I need to get home soon before we hit the traffic. All right, Scaly said. We'll continue next time with some more science and history. We'll talk more about electricity, fuel, and how the early space missions lead to the ones we're doing today. Alex nodded. But to finish my earlier thought, when the first few starships landed autonomously in 2027, they brought the initial equipment that was used to start manufacturing fuel from regolith and lunar ice. That fuel was to make return trips to Earth and getting elsewhere in the solar system much easier. But we'll talk more about that next time. And we'll do some more mathematics work to calculate how much fuel these lunar missions need. Scaly pointed at the starship in the distance and it went transparent so that Alex could see the millions of liters of virtual fuel sloshing around inside its tanks. But just a hint, it's a lot of fuel. Alex mouthed in amazement and he nodded. I'll send you some reading exercises later that are based on what we studied today and will help you with next week's school maths and writing tests, Scaly said as he materialized a retro silver jetpack out of nothingness and slipped it onto his arched back, the metal making a ringing sound as it slid over his scales. Thanks, Scaly. You're the best, and I really enjoyed today, Alex said, not untruthfully, as Scaly nodded and igniting the jetpack. See you later, Scaly said, and gave a ferocious roar as he launched himself into the lunar sky, doing circles higher and higher above the truck Alex was standing on. Alex laughed and watched him for a little bit until he couldn't make out Scaly's helmeted face anymore. Then he pulled his headset off and winced at the sharp sunset light that hit his face and squinted as his eyes adjusted. He swung his legs off the chair he had been ensconced in for nearly 4 hours now and stretched. Then he put his headset in his backpack and went to help his mom put some things away as she talked to the nighttime restaurant manager who had just arrived. They then said goodbye to him, and Alex and his mom made their way out onto the sunset-soaked street, and he told her all about his afternoon's lessons and the things he now knew about farming, the moon, the earth, and everything else Scaly had taught him. He actually felt a bit like a sponge that had been left in water for too long. Such was the amount of cool new things he had learned. His mom listened attentively and praised him when he told her about what he had guessed correctly and figured out with Scaly's help. They walked home through the busy streets and Alex smiled as he relayed his afternoon's activities, his mind abuzz with what he now knew about Earth and the moon and ratios and all the amazing things he still had to learn. So that is chapter 2 of The Mandate of Athena, a novel about AI. The voice is actually really sore. Only when you actually read through, like I've edited this and posted it and read it several times and that, but only when you read your writing out for the first time do you actually see some of the spelling errors or some of the logical inconsistencies in the story. So yeah, I guess this novel is more of like a first draft, but I don't intend on working on it further. But it's cool. Pro writing tip: read your work aloud and you'll see all the discrepancies and things that could be improved and fixed. But yeah, these I don't know if I've mentioned it as well, but all these images are generated using AI, using Midjourney, and it's surprisingly accurate actually in getting the kind of pictures that I wanted. It really seems to do well at generating cartoons. Obviously, like this prompt, I prompted it Velociraptor wearing a helmet, but it was obviously a bit too complicated for the model and that, and some like Russian influences as well in some of these like comic book, old like Soviet era comic book depictions of rockets on the moon. But yeah, that was chapter 2 of the novel. I'll read chapter 3 soon. Hope you're having a great weekend, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.